Nick McKinn, the Green Senator, is here with us instead. I'm not saying you're a bad replacement. High Court decision today, a very interesting one. So this is around Aboriginal Australians. Two men, there was an attempt to deport them.
Yes.
They were born overseas, they were not Australian citizens. 4-3, the decision has been made that they essentially have a special place within Australia and they can't found to be aliens. It's an intriguing decision. It's going to get lawyers talking. What's your initial reaction?
Well, look, it is an intriguing decision. In fact, it's a really important, even a landmark decision by the High Court, because as you've alluded to, the High Court's effectively found that Aboriginal people have such a close relationship with country and with place that the government, it's not open to the government to consider them as aliens. So from the Greens' point of view, we welcome this decision. We think it was the right decision. But yes, there's an awful lot about the government and the minister that they would take a decision to effectively try and deport someone from land that we in effect stole from them 200 years ago, and it's very hard to see this decision in any other context than a racist decision by government.
It is interesting, and I'm not super across the details of this one. I was just reading about it this morning, but when you look at the context of Mabo, you had to have the ongoing relationship with the land to be considered to be a traditional owner, and then you've got these people who were born and raised overseas and then they'd come back for a short period of time. It seems like that connection would be broken.
Well, there were two people to which who took cases. The same case in effect to the High Court. So there are two different sets of circumstances here, and the High Court has made a slightly different decision in regards to...
Well, for one of them, they're questioning, I think, their Indigenous heritage, essentially, whether that's ascertained. They're both born overseas, right?
That's right, as I understand it, but certainly one of them, there was no dispute that, in fact, that gentleman was an Aboriginal person and was recognised as such. And the idea that you could deport someone like that just beggars belief, to be honest. So we think it's a good decision, but it does raise the issue of on what planet a white minister could make a decision to try and have an Aboriginal person declared as alien in their own country. And I think that's the way we need to look at this, and I hope that the High Court decision makes it very clear in the future that the government and the minister shouldn't try to do this. And one of the gentlemen, as far as I know, still remains in immigration detention, so he needs to be cut loose immediately and allowed to return to his people and to his country.
Wasn't he going to jail? Isn't that the whole point that they can?
No, he was in immigration detention because the minister had attempted to cancel a visa under the 501 provisions of the Act.
Well, there's no appeal from the High Court. You say it makes it clear, 4-3, so if there's another test case in the future and the makeup changes, who knows, but for now, that is what they have decided. I want to talk about climate. The Greens have focused a lot on the government's approach and the Australian government falling behind, you say. The state of the Paris Agreement and momentum is pretty poor. 3 countries out of 194 have lodged plans to boost action by 2030 by this deadline. This is not blowing up because of Australia. A lot of countries talk and don't act. That's the reality of Paris, isn't it?
That's unfortunately the situation where most countries appear not to be meeting their Paris targets, and I don't think that removes any responsibility from Australia to act. I mean, we need to take a position as global leaders. I mean, we've used coal-fired power and benefited from the emissions in terms of our economic growth, and many other countries haven't had as much of an opportunity to do that, and we need to play a role as global leaders, not just for the whole planet in terms of the imperative to reduce emissions, but in fact because it's in our own self-interest to do it. If we can become global leaders in things like generating jobs through renewable energy, then we can export that technology and that expertise overseas. But the critical thing here is the climate science is telling us we've got a decade to make a difference, and we have to bring emissions down by 2030. And Australia, like many other countries, is falling behind, and we are all going to need to answer to our children and to our grandchildren about how we've acted now and in the next decade.
Okay, so the government's argument is, though, that we contribute so little to global emissions, 1.3%, I think, and so why just focus on renewables? Why not keep power on at the same time, keep it cheap,
Well, in fact, renewables are about keeping the power on and keeping it cheap. I mean, new renewables are much cheaper than new coal, which is why the government shouldn't be investing.
It gets very blurry when you add on reliability, battery, for example.
Well, batteries are stepping into that space, and in fact, there's been times when the wholesale power price of electricity in South Australia has been the lowest in the country in recent months.
And times the most expensive.
Yeah, these things fluctuate and they vary, but the idea that the government is trying to propose that in fact renewables are expensive and unreliable just does not fit
Isn't that
reality.
unreliable though if the price varies that drastically? That's
Well, price on coal. Well, we have a national electricity market, and generators bid in and generate a spot price through that process. So all of this varies depending on a range of factors, but for the government to categorise renewables as bad, more expensive and less reliable does not fit reality.
On the rhetoric, Adam Bandt, the new leader of the Greens, has been making a lot of conversation with a 17-year-old he had who said they don't want children, they can't think a year ahead, and Adam Bandt says, well, that's a rational reaction. Is it really though? Can't they be assured that thinking a year ahead isn't all that rational?
Well, we've got young people at home as well, and I talk to them a lot about this, and it is fair to say that many young people are becoming angry, they're becoming frustrated, and you can see that. They're taking to the streets and demanding action, and some of them are becoming depressed about the future. This is really serious.
And I understand that, but is it a question of telling those people, look, there are problems, but we've had problems before, there are technological solutions? I mean, you might have grown up under the shadow of the Cold War. If you didn't think more than a year ahead, you might not have gone to university. This is the point, that this person should be told, don't throw away your future, educate yourself. There's every chance the world's not going to end.
Well, and get active and be part of the conversation and part of the activism that will actually deliver the future that they want to see. I mean, it's very difficult to be a young person at the moment, much more difficult certainly than when I grew up, and we weren't facing some of these significant crises. But yes, we have to offer hope to young people. If that's your proposition, I totally agree with that. We need to offer hope to young people because we do have the technology. What we're lacking is the political will. So what gives me great hope is seeing those young people on the street saying we're not prepared to put up with this anymore, we want to see action. And that applies equally to people who will be affected in the transition, such as people living and working in coal communities. We need to offer them hope and a plan so that they can understand that there are decent, meaningful jobs that will apply through and after the transition that the climate science is telling us we need to have.
And just finally, can we ask about federal ICAC? You're pushing for it. Are you encouraging Nats to cross the floor against the government on it?
Absolutely, we think Nats should cross the floor.
Have you been speaking to them about it?
I haven't personally spoken. There may have been some conversations that I'm not aware of, but the Senate yesterday voted to send a message down to the House of Representatives. We've got the Greens bill through the Senate, and that's an anti-corruption authority that's actually got real teeth, unlike the one the government's proposing. And we have sent a message down to the House that we want that bill brought on in the House. And if that was the case, we could have a federal ICAC with real teeth up and running in a few short months. And boy, given what we've seen from this government over the last few months, it's never been more needed.
Nick McKim, thanks for your time.
Thanks, guys.